Have you ever been fined for simply being kind? Imagine this: a family sees a starving cat, puts out a little food, and instead of thanks, their HOA hits them with thousands of dollars in fines. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened here. And before we dive into this shocking story, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever faced an HOA fine that made you wonder if the rules were more about control than community? Your stories help others know they're not alone. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and share your own HOA experiences in the comments. Have you ever faced a ridiculous fine like this? Your stories make this community stronger. It started on an ordinary spring evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The Thompson family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their 2 kids, were finishing dinner when Emily noticed something moving outside the sliding glass door. At first, she thought it was a raccoon, but when she opened the curtain, her heart broke. A thin, ragged orange cat sat hunched on the patio, its ribs visible, fur matted, and eyes wide with hunger. It let out a weak, pitiful meow, as if asking for help. Emily knelt down, whispering softly through the glass, "Oh, sweetheart, you're starving." She brought out a small bowl of leftover chicken. The cat devoured it like it hadn't eaten in days. From that moment on, the Thompsons had a new nightly visitor. The kids named him Pumpkin. Every evening, he'd appear at the patio door, tail twitching, waiting patiently for scraps of food. Emily bought cat kibble just for him. She even put out a small blanket in a corner of the porch so he'd have somewhere warm to curl up at night. Neighbors noticed too. "That cat's been wandering for months," Mrs. Green from across the street said. "Poor thing, belongs to nobody." For the Thompsons, it wasn't about ownership. They weren't trying to adopt Pumpkin yet, anyway. They just couldn't ignore his suffering. But while some neighbors smiled at the sight of the kids, giggling as Pumpkin batted at strings and played in the yard, not everyone was happy. Enter Janet. She was the HOA's compliance officer, which was just a fancy title for the woman who walked around with a clipboard looking for trouble. She noticed the food bowls on the porch during one of her evening walks and made a note. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the Thompsons' mailbox. In bold letters, it read, "HOA violation notice, unauthorized feeding of stray animals." The letter accused the family of encouraging nuisance wildlife, claiming that feeding the cat could attract raccoons, possums, or even coyotes. The HOA warned that if the food bowls weren't removed immediately, the Thompsons would face a $100 fine for each day of non-compliance. Emily's jaw dropped. Are they serious? They think feeding a starving cat is a violation. Mark tried to laugh it off. It's probably just a warning. We'll talk to them, clear things up. But Emily wasn't amused. They want us to pretend we didn't see him, to let him starve. "I won't do it, Mark, I can't." The kids begged to. "Please, Mom, don't stop feeding Pumpkin. He'll die without us." So Emily kept putting out food. Pumpkin kept coming back. And the HOA kept watching. A week later, another letter arrived, this one, colder, harsher. The fines had already started accumulating. $700 owed. The Thompsons were stunned. $700. For feeding a stray cat, Mark muttered, slamming the letter down. And it was only the beginning, because what the HOA didn't realize was that Pumpkin wasn't just a hungry stray anymore. He was about to bring neighbors together in a way that the board never expected. The Thompsons thought maybe the HOA would eventually cool off. After all, this was just a harmless act of kindness. But they underestimated Janet, the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood's rules. By the next HOA board meeting, Pumpkin had become a full-blown scandal. Janet stood in front of the room with her usual clipboard in hand. "This is a serious matter," she announced, flipping through her notes with theatrical precision. "The Thompsons are encouraging wild animals onto the property. This could pose a health hazard, a safety risk, and it violates our bylaws." Some neighbors nodded politely, but others exchanged doubtful glances. After all, everyone had seen Pumpkin. He wasn't dangerous. He was just a lonely, hungry cat. One neighbor, Mr. Lopez, finally spoke up. "Janet, with all due respect, that's no wild animal. That's a stray cat. There's a difference." But Janet wasn't budging. She waved her clipboard like a gavel. "The rules are the rules. Feeding strays attracts vermin. Next thing you know, we'll have an infestation. If we allow one resident to break the rules, where does it stop?" Emily, who had come to defend her family, clenched her fists under the table. "So compassion is against the rules now? We're talking about a starving animal, not an army of rats." Janet gave a tight, smug smile. "If you care that much, take the cat to a shelter, but do not continue feeding it here." What Janet didn't say but everyone knew was that most shelters in the county were already overcrowded. Many strays taken there were euthanized within days. Emily knew this too, which is why her heart sank at Janet's suggestion. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to uphold the fines. The Thompsons now owed $1,500. But instead of backing down, something unexpected happened. The story started to spread. First among neighbors, then through a local Facebook group. People couldn't believe the HOA was punishing a family for showing basic decency. Support trickled in. A neighbor left a bag of cat food on the Thompsons' porch with a note, "For Pumpkin, don't stop caring." Another neighbor quietly slipped an envelope with $50 into their mailbox to help with the fines. Soon, more and more people were rallying behind the Thompsons. Some even began putting out bowls of water and food on their own porches. The quiet act of rebellion made Janet furious. She marched door to door, warning residents that fines would extend to anyone who dared to feed the stray. She sent out a mass email titled, "Stop Encouraging Wildlife," but the harder she pushed, the more resistance she faced. The neighborhood was dividing into two camps, Team Janet and HOA rules, cold, strict, and unwilling to bend. Team Pumpkin and compassion, ordinary neighbors who believed kindness shouldn't be treated like a crime. Emily noticed something remarkable. People who barely spoke to one another before were now bonding over this little orange cat. Conversations sparked on sidewalks. Strangers knocked on her door to share their own stories about each HOA's gone too far. One evening, as the kids played with Pumpkin in the yard, a neighbor whispered, "That cat has united this whole street, more than the HOA ever did." But the Thompsons were still trapped under a growing mountain of fines. The HOA had threatened to put a lien on their house if they didn't pay up. The stakes were getting higher and Emily knew they couldn't keep ignoring it. Mark, who had been trying to stay calm, finally slammed his fist on the kitchen table. "Enough is enough. If they think they can bully us for helping an innocent animal, they've got another thing coming." It was time to fight back. What Emily and Mark did next would shock the entire community and put the HOA under a spotlight they'd never expected. Mark and Emily knew they couldn't just sit by while the HOA bullied them. The fines had climbed past $2,500, and the board's latest letter threatened a lien on their home if they didn't comply. "This isn't about a cat anymore," Mark said one night, staring at the stack of violation notices. "This is about power. If they can fine us for this, they can fine us for anything." Emily nodded. "Then we're not just fighting for Pumpkin, we're fighting for everyone in this neighborhood who's tired of being pushed around." The plan: the Thompsons contacted a local animal welfare organization. Within days, volunteers came out, documented Pumpkin's condition, and explained that he wasn't a nuisance or wild animal, he was a community cat. In fact, county ordinances encouraged feeding and caring for strays in humane ways, especially since volunteers often trapped, neutered, and vaccinated them to prevent overpopulation. With this information, the Thompsons had a weapon the HOA didn't expect: the law itself. Mark also posted their story online, attaching photos of Pumpkin with the kids and copies of the violation letters. "Our HOA is fining us for feeding a starving cat. What would you do?" he wrote. The post went viral in local groups. Dozens of neighbors chimed in, calling the HOA heartless. A reporter from a small local paper reached out, and within a week, a headline appeared: "Family fined thousands by HOA for feeding hungry stray cat." The story struck a nerve. People were outraged. Donations poured into a GoFundMe page the neighbors set up to help the Thompsons cover legal costs. The showdown: the next HOA board meeting was standing room only. Residents who had never bothered to attend suddenly showed up, furious and ready to speak. Emily stood at the front, Pumpkin's photo in hand, and addressed the board. "You've fined us thousands of dollars for showing compassion. But county law says feeding and caring for strays is not illegal, it's encouraged. And this neighborhood agrees." Look around. Murmurs of support filled the room. Neighbors clapped. Some even shouted, "That's right." Janet, red-faced, tried to regain control. "This is disorderly conduct. This meeting is for board business, not board business." Mark cut her off. "You mean punishing families for being decent human beings? It's not business, that's abuse of power." At that, the room erupted. Residents who had been quietly resentful of Janet's rulebook tyranny finally spoke up. Stories spilled out: fines for leaving trash cans out a few hours late, warnings for kids' bicycles left on lawns, even penalties for holiday decorations that weren't uniform. One by one, neighbors stood against the HOA board. What had started as just a cat had now become the symbol of years of frustration. The fallout: faced with overwhelming pressure, the board had no choice. They voted to rescind the fines against the Thompsons. And not just that, several members resigned, leaving Janet without her majority power. Pumpkin, the little stray, had done something incredible. He'd brought the neighborhood together and exposed the HOA's cruelty for all to see. A month later, with help from the animal welfare group, Pumpkin was fully vaccinated, neutered, and officially adopted by the Thompsons. Of course, he had a warm bed, plenty of food, and a family that adored him. Neighbors often stopped by to scratch his ears or drop off treats. Kids played with him in the yard. He had gone from unwanted stray to beloved community mascot. As for the HOA, the neighborhood voted in new board members, people who believed rules should serve the community, not control it. Janet quietly disappeared from her compliance officer role, her clipboard nowhere to be seen. The lesson: the Thompson story spread far beyond their street. For many, it became proof that HOAs can overstep, and that sometimes, all it takes is one small act of kindness to expose a system's flaws. Emily summed it up best. They fined us for feeding a hungry cat. But in the end, that little cat showed everyone what real community looks like.